Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. We did not have newsletters over the weekend, and I apologize for that. But I wanted to unplug a little bit over a 4-day weekend, but there were moments when I thought, okay, well, here's some crazy thing that I probably should do something about or keep track of. And then after a while, you realize, no, it's just more crazy things. It's just, I mean, how many times do you need to go, hey, the president said something really crazy, batshit crazy, and here's another conspiracy theory, and here's the president of the United States sounding like the drunken crank at the end of the bar. And so here we are on Monday. And if you're wondering what you missed, good news is the president's attempts to overturn the election. And by the way, he's not even being subtle about that. He really wants to overturn the election, have been spectacularly unsuccessful. He's lost at he's lost at every level of the courts, admitting yesterday that he's not likely to get to the Supreme Court. He got slammed down by the Third Circuit Court the other day by a Trump appointed judge, interestingly enough, which continues his streak of judges going, what the hell are you talking about? Do you really think that we are going to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of votes based on this legal dreck? We have a great piece up on the Bulwark about the latest filing from Sidney Powell releasing the Kraken, which is probably crazier than you think it is. You probably think that it's bad. It actually turns out to be even worse. I think the line was, it sounds like something that was written at the after party after a 3-day QAnon convention. So we are joined this Monday morning after the long holiday weekend, by our good friend David Priess, the Chief Operating Officer of Lawfare. First of all, good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning, Charlie. I am great. And I got to tell you, the last 4 days, so going from Thanksgiving through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think I probably consumed less news and paid less attention to the president's tweets during those entire 4 days than I do during the usual hour of the last day of the last 4 years. And my soul is refreshed. I actually feel healthier, smarter, wiser, more charming. All those things have happened because of the release of that burden of feeling like I had to pay attention to it. And then, of course, this morning I catch up on what he did in that interview, and I catch up on the Sidney Powell story in the Bulwark, and I just bang my head against the wall again, and it all goes away.
Well, let's go for the optimistic perspective that maybe
Yeah.
this is a little bit of a taste of what life is going to be like post-Trump, if there ever is a post-Trump, if there ever is a moment at which we stop thinking and obsessing about this one-term president. And by the way, he is a one-term president who's been fired by 80 million
Mhm.
voters. He's having a hard time processing that. Although I do think the people who said, we just need to give him space, give him time to process it. I wonder whether they're rethinking that today, because this is just not going well.
Yeah, his processing speed is like, you remember old dial-up, like old AOL to
Oh,
log
yeah.
on, and
Yeah.
that's kind of his processing speed. And at least based on the tweets that I did catch up on and see, um, it doesn't seem like there's any processing going on. And if anything, he's digging in the heels, shouting "rigged" into an empty room, and it's not been a helpful strategy, certainly for democracy. Enough people have talked about that. But even for the purpose that they stated, of course, anonymously to reporters, that, oh, we just need to give him time to get used to it and he'll calm down. It's not even working for its stated purpose. So
No,
you're
and
burning down norms and traditions and the future of democracy for a goal that is unattainable. Good job there.
well, speaking of Georgia, Republicans are starting to realize, hey, maybe this isn't working out well. You still have that special election for the Senate in Georgia on January 5th, and he's allegedly planning on going down there this Saturday to campaign. And what is he spending the morning doing? Attacking the Republican Secretary of State and the governor. He's attacking
Hmm.
the governor, Brian Kemp. So what is he going to do when he goes down to Georgia to campaign for the Republicans, except to spread more of this toxic sludge, maybe a little bit counterproductive?
It's one of the few cases in the last few years, Charlie, where we're actually seeing them reaping what they sowed. Because
Yeah.
if you cast doubt on the election over and over and over again and say it was rigged and insist that there's been fraud, some some percentage of the population, let's say in Georgia, believes that, actually thinks that that is true and thinks that this is an injustice and it must be fought and we're going to go to the bitter end. Okay, that's fine. Most of the people around the president know that's a joke, but they're still doing it. But what happens to the people in Georgia? That's when you get Ronna McDaniel going and giving a speech about we need to focus on the Senate elections. And the people of Georgia are shouting her down, saying, but what about this fraud that's been perpetrated on the president? We have to fight that. And she's saying, oh, well, we'll address that later. And you can understand the cognitive dissonance that comes from the sheep who say, but we have been told that this election, which already happened, is fraudulent. Shouldn't we take care of that first before
Yeah, I
we
mean,
move to next month's election?
Hugo
And
Chavez is controlling the voting machine. You just told us that Hugo Chavez is flipping all the votes. Why should we bother to vote in one of these Hugo Chavez controlled voting machines? And she's like, yeah, it's like, well, that's the part of the problem. If other people are not in on the joke, I mean, there's
right,
this huge group of people who are like they're neither smart nor they're neither dumb nor crazy. Uh, who kind of know what's going on here, but figure they're going to go along with the con because there are going to be people who will believe it, and then they're kind of surprised that hey, there are people who kind of believe this,
you should
and
never fully believe your own propaganda because once you do, you start acting based on it, and that's the case of Georgia. As you've got people you've put in their mind this propaganda, they're acting based on it, and then they're discovering, well, that gets in the way of what our goal is, which is to retain the Senate in January.
So let's talk a little bit about the president's. Again, this is a 4-day long
Mhm.
crazy binge by the president. I mean, he probably had one of the worst Thanksgivings by any president ever. So we're just going to move ahead to that. So he goes on Maria Bartiromo's show yesterday. And there was a time when she was considered kind of a crack reporter. She just lets him go on and on and on and doesn't push back. So let's play the first one where he just can't believe, he just can't believe that there's any way that Joe Biden got more votes than Barack Obama, who he refers to as Barack Hussein Obama. Let's play that.
Ballot boxes, and they use COVID as a means to stuff the ballot boxes. Joe Biden did not get 16 million more votes than Barack Hussein Obama. He didn't get it. Joe Biden did not get 14 million more votes than Hillary Clinton. And by the way, he didn't beat Obama in the black communities. You go to some of these communities where Obama is very, very popular, and he beats them in some of these communities, but all throughout the rest of the United States, in a black community, he does actually poorly. He doesn't do very well. But he beats Obama in swing states. Now think of that. He beat Obama in swing states. You know that didn't happen. They stuffed the ballot box. Everybody knows that.
This is some of the impossible statistics that we have found. And this is from the Federalist article. They call it Biden magic, and they list a number of ways that Joe Biden magically outperformed election norms. They include 80 million.
See,
Wow.
this is you reached a certain point. I don't even know what you would call it, where you have Maria Bartiromo citing an article from the Federalist in an interview with Donald Trump. I mean, it's like this thing eating itself. And by the way, this has been fact checked over and over again. No, he did not. Joe Biden did not underperform Hillary Clinton in every major metropolitan area around the country except for Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. It's just not true. But it is interesting, David, that they've been flinging one conspiracy theory after another. But what it comes down to is that Donald Trump just cannot believe that he got beaten so badly by Joe Biden. That Joe Biden, this guy he's been telling everybody was senile, that was so weak and everything, that he actually got 80 million votes. So he's basically reduced to saying he couldn't possibly have gotten 80 million votes. There's no way it happened without any evidence whatsoever.
It's possible that Trump can't believe it. It's possible that Trump thinks he must have won because he's Trump. I'm not convinced of it. I still don't know that it's really a strategy. I'm not sure he's really that thoughtful. I think he's just in, he's Twitter troll mode. And when your brand is outrage, when your brand is bring the energy, remember his criticism against Jeb Bush back in the primaries.
No.
It wasn't a substantive disagreement for large part. I mean, he criticized the Iraq War, which Jeb Bush had nothing to do with except his name. He criticized Jeb Bush for being low energy. Energy is his brand, outrage is his brand. And maybe just all these shouts of rigged and can you believe this? It goes along with birtherism and birth certificates. It goes along with Hillary Clinton. It's a pattern. And honestly, I don't like trying to get inside his brain. It's a scary place. But I'm not convinced that he really thinks he won. I think he just likes ranting about it.
It's impossible to tell with him whether or not this is just the launch of the next new grift, or what we do know about him is that he's obsessed with not being a loser. That going back to being a child, that he never wanted to be a loser. He divides the world into winners and losers, and this is traumatic for him. And so he's doing everything possible to deflect it. But I think he had some certainly unfortunate moments over the last couple of days, including when he sort of lashed out at a certain Twitter meme, which I'm not going to get into, said that because of national security, they needed to eliminate Section 230 because people were doing a hashtag about him. And then, of course, he had that picture at the little table, the little kids' table.
It was so cute.
I mean, actually thought it was
such a good little pupil.
I thought it was Photoshopped. And then, of course, look, if you're Donald Trump, and certain things are trending, you shouldn't be using terms like big dump. I'm just saying it's not. It's okay. Let's play that one. Here we go. Yeah.
And what happened, if you watched the election, I was called by the biggest people saying, congratulations, political people. Congratulations, sir. You just won the election. It was 10 o'clock and you looked at the numbers, and I'm sure you felt that way. This election was over. And then they did dumps. They call them dumps, big, massive dumps in Michigan and Pennsylvania. And all over, if you take a look.
Big, massive dumps.
It's sad. I shouldn't be laughing because it is at some level it's sad. I mean, if you take this out of context and you just listen to it, I mean, it's kind of a sad old man seeking attention, and there is something at a human level that's compelling about it if you just put aside all the monstrosity of the last few years. But yeah, raving about all the big dumps in the swing states.
Yeah, I would love to know who the big political people who called him up and said, "Sir," and what, Corey Lewandowski?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, you're gone. You're down past the A, B, and C list. Yeah,
I don't know. Rudy Giuliani.
There's another aspect of this, Charlie, that maybe this is out there in the ether, and I've picked up on it somewhere. So I'll give credit if anybody can find the credit. Please do give credit if this is a borrowed idea. But it occurs to me that Donald Trump is raging against the absolutely unfair conditions in multiple states, and how could this happen? And Biden couldn't have done this, and the election was rigged. Basically saying the entire election infrastructure is corrupt, and it's an entire election infrastructure during his administration.
Yeah.
And yet he's claiming that the election that brought him to power, there were nothing was wrong with that. He called it the perfect election. Everything went well for him. And that was run by Barack Obama. So the logic of this, Mr. Trump, is that are you saying that the election infrastructure as run by Barack Obama was perfect, and the election infrastructure that you oversaw was inherently rigged and flawed against you? I mean, either you're incompetent or you're self-destructive, and I'm not sure which is better.
Well, this is why none of it makes any sense, because if in fact we have become a third world country in terms of elections, it would have happened in the last 4 years under his watch. So that's number one, to your point. Number two, the fact that nobody's questioning any of the down ballot election results, because in theory, if there was this massive hack, attack, stuffed ballots, you would have had more Democrats who had been elected. Also, you can't think too hard about some of this stuff, because in Georgia, where they went through and they hand counted the ballots, they've done an audit of the ballots, and he's still screaming that he won, that the results were switched in the machines. I mean, these are reality checks. These are just absolute facts. You can fact check it all day long. So he just keeps moving from one thing to another. Unfortunately, and I wrote this morning in my newsletter, this election trutherism is going to be the basis of Trumpism
Right.
from this day forward, and it
Right.
will never go away. And you do have some people who are batshit crazy. Yes, you also have people who are just incredibly gullible, who don't understand that there were no dumps, that these were the election results. Everybody knew there were going to be late absentee ballots that were counted. And then you have the Republicans who know better, who are, and who could be standing up at this moment for the integrity of our democratic process, who are just living in fear of his tweets. And then, of course, you have all of these really cynical politicians, the Marco Rubios, the Ted Cruzes, the Josh Hawleys, the Rand Pauls, some of these, Newsmax, who figure, okay, we don't necessarily believe it, but we're going to ride this. We're going to ride this tiger. We're going to ride this as long as we can, because this is in our interest. And even if it undermines democracy, we see our main chance.
Yeah, I liked your taxonomy there, Charlie. It really laid out for you. The problem is they intersect, and
They do.
I can't tell you where almost anyone is within one of those categories, because they seem to bleed over to the others. It's hard to tell who the true cynic is versus the true believer when some of the rhetoric is the same. And I'm not sure that it matters ultimately. I mean, it still contributes to the same pathologies that we're going to be dealing with in 2 years and 4 years and from here on. We did not have the decisive result that people hoped, a repudiation of all of Trump's supporters and enablers. That did not happen, which in a sense gives them oxygen, whether they are the cynic or the true believer. They think they're on to something. We do face the bigger problem, of course, which is what happens in the actual administration of a Biden presidency. Does the Trumpist gene in the Republican Party simply become an absolute obstructionist gene, picking up on some of the McConnellism of the late Obama administration, but taking that to another level? At that point, we need to have a system that has checks and balances. We want to have opposition to policies argued in Congress. That's great. That's the way we do things. We do not want to have knee-jerk rejection of anything that Team X says because we are on Team Y. Nothing gets done that way. I think it's telling that you had a Republican president several decades ago, George H.W. Bush, who had Congress controlled by the other party, and yet he was able to get through legislation, environmental legislation, disabilities legislation, things of that sort. Things can get done when you have principled compromises without compromising your principles. That's not what people are talking about now. If this Trumpism continues in the act of governance, you're simply going to have obstruction for the sake of obstruction, and that's not good for any of us.
Yeah, and I think that people are, who have been thinking, well, we'll be able to roll off this tiger when it's convenient for us, or finding out that that's going to be difficult. I wonder how many of these folks are going to feel the need to boycott the quote unquote inauguration, whatever that inauguration is at this point, because any cooperation at all with the Biden administration becomes a matter of disloyalty. So I'm noticing a couple of tweets out. National Review has a piece that really says, it's time to really put an end to this craziness. And they write, it's hard to find much that is remotely true in the president's Twitter feed these days. It is full of already debunked claims and crackpot conspiracy theories about Dominion voting systems. Could I just point out that this was a magazine that ran a piece a few weeks ago, Maybe Trump? All the smart people who are saying that there are problems with his Twitter feed, but at least he's better than those socialist Democrats. So let's give him 4 more years in power. I'm trying to imagine the people who really thought that it was a good idea. And there's like 70 million people who thought that looking at Donald Trump, seeing Donald Trump, knowing Donald Trump's character, because nothing is really inconsistent about this, thought back then, let's give him another 4 years, or who are watching him right now undermine the election, doing things that a lot of smart people said, oh, he will never not acknowledge the result of the election. He would never try to overturn the Electoral College. Well, he's doing it right now. You still think he should get 4 more years? And will you support him if he runs in 2024? Because a lot of people are watching what's happening right now and will say, yes, let's restore him 4 years from now. Okay, so David, let's just turn the page a little bit today. Today is the first day that President-elect Joe Biden and the Vice President-elect will be receiving the Presidential Daily Brief, the PDB. Now, this is right in your wheelhouse. So let's talk about this. They have not gotten it until now. What are they going to be seeing, hearing today?
Yeah, let's take one step back to kind of define the PDB in the first place. So, the President's Daily Brief is the highest level intelligence document produced in the US government. It is tailored specifically for the person who occupies the Oval Office, not in terms of telling him what he wants to hear, but in terms of telling him what he needs to hear. So the analysts from around the intelligence community gather all of the information that they can from clandestine collection as well as from open sources and try to describe what's going on in the world, try to describe the North Korean nuclear program, try to figure out what's going on in Chinese politics, in Russian military developments, as well as, transnational issues like terrorism and the pandemic. And the idea is to prepare the president each day to have the best possible picture of what's going on in an uncertain world in case a threat comes up or an opportunity arises. It's not always perfect, but the goal is to present timely, accurate, objective information to narrow the range of uncertainty, to enable better national security decision making. And this has been going on since 1964. Lyndon Johnson got the first PDB, and every president has taken it in one form or another and benefited from it. In the Trump era, we've had reporting suggesting that the President's Daily Brief has been tailored to the president as it should be. And in this case, it's probably been shortened. Indications are that Trump doesn't like to read long documents, so it's presented probably with more bullet points than with long text articles. The reporting suggests there are plenty of charts and graphs and pictures. We don't need to take that to the comical extreme of pretending that it's a coloring book or pretending that it's just cartoons. That does a disservice, honestly, to the intelligence community, who I know from experience, we could present very important, complicated arguments very clearly and in very short form when we needed to. If you needed to get the North Korean nuclear program down to one or two sentences, you would lose a whole lot of nuance, but you could do it. So there's no doubt in my mind that the PDB is still getting key intelligence judgments to the president and those around him, even though Trump is a unique customer. Now bring in President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. In Biden's case, he saw the PDB for 8 years when he was vice president under Barack Obama. And Obama's PDB, by all measures, was a robust document. Obama liked to read. He did also take regular briefings with his intelligence community officers, but most days he did not see them, and he read the book. It was an extensive document with lots of text, lots of articles. That is what Biden is used to seeing. That's what he thinks the PDB is, because that was his only exposure to it. Today, he's going to see something that probably looks a bit different. But that's not all he's going to get, because the intelligence community officers who are on site there to support him, to brief him on the PDB, are also going to be supplementing the PDB, as they always do for presidents-elect during the transition, because you have got a PDB that has an article today on something going on in some country of the world that builds on perhaps 3.5 years of daily stories to the president. The president is already up to speed on those. Joe Biden hasn't seen any of that. So the briefers put together supplemental memos, facing pages, or just oral briefings to say, Mr. President-elect, you're going to read this story about X, but you're going to need this background to understand how we got here. How did we get from where you left things 4 years ago to what you're reading today? So he's going to get that background, and he's going to get filled in on that. I think he'll have a very steep learning curve, because there have been a lot of developments internationally in the last 4 years. But I think he's going to race right up that curve, because he has the experience with intelligence to know what it is, to know what it isn't, to know how to use it, to know how not to use it. Senator Harris will probably have a little bit more getting used to it, because the PDB is not made available to the Senate. So even on the Intelligence Committee, she will not have seen it, but she will have been certainly made familiar with high-level intelligence, and the kinds of judgments and the kinds of language she'll be reading in there probably won't be that much of a surprise to her, because they certainly would be consistent with what she's been receiving on the Intel Committee.
Well, I would think that one of the first questions that both of them would have is, what is Iran going to do? Over the weekend, it appears that the Israelis assassinated the chief nuclear scientist in Iran. Apparently, they had like a dozen assassins. This is, again, not a military figure. He's not a political figure. He's a scientist. And the Iranians have to make kind of a choice now, right? Because they know that if they overreact, if they retaliate, it could make it harder for them to be able to deal with the incoming Biden administration. In fact, there was a lot of speculation over the weekend that one of the goals of this was not just to kill this scientist, which is an end in of itself, but also to make it much, much harder for the Biden administration to walk back some of the Trump policies involving Iran, including the nuclear deal. So that's on his plate right now, isn't it? I mean, that's got to be something that they're going to be discussing today.
It would stand to reason that the president's daily brief would have intelligence about Iran and its reaction to this act. If there were in any way, if it were an Israeli act, which I don't know, but the reporting suggests it was, it's possible that there could be some assessment of that claim. If it was something that the Israeli government discussed with any elements of the United States government in advance, that's the kind of stuff that's usually not in the president's daily brief, because that's stuff that would have been discussed separately. That's not an intelligence assessment. That's actual policy discussions. But it would make sense that Iran would be a frequent topic in the PDB lately, and certainly now, to assess what are they going to do in response to this, or how would they be likely to react if something else happened like this. The benefit for Joe Biden right now is that he doesn't have to act on any of it today. That is, he can soak in the intelligence. He can read it. He can ask his briefers questions. He can get supplemental information. He can get up to speed without having the burden of acting, so that when on January 20th he does take the oath and become commander in chief, he can be well prepared to do what he needs to do then. And you're right, he may inherit a mess, because something that we can't rule out at this point is that Trump and perhaps some of his senior-most advisors are actively seeking to make a mess that the Biden administration will have to deal with, simply for the sake of punching Biden in the gut. Horrible for American national security. It's bad governance. It's the kind of behavior that is abhorrent, but it is certainly, we can't rule it out right now, that they're going to do things deliberately to make things hard for Biden when he comes in.
Okay, so now this is a tricky question here. So you're the Iranians and you want to know, okay, what are the prospects of what Joe Biden is going to do? How would he react to certain retaliatory steps that we would take? Same thing going on in the Middle East, where we're hearing that Jared Kushner is off talking to the Saudis and trying to do something in the Gulf. What is the standard for back channel communications? And I'm keeping General Flynn in mind here. That he got in trouble for some of the communications. So I mean, at some point, wouldn't the Iranians want to have some sort of a back channel communication to the Biden folks, thinking, okay, what are you guys thinking? What is your reaction going to be to all of this? Wouldn't it be rational for the Biden people to have some sort of a back channel communication telling the Iranians this wouldn't be a good time to overreact? So how does that work out? How do you do that without ending up in the situation that General Flynn was in?
Well, here's how it's supposed to work, is through the unlocking of the Presidential Transition Act. That is that whole GSA ascertainment issue. The Biden transition has access to classified spaces, has access to government translators, and now the phone calls with world leaders and conversations with foreign governments can be part of an organized process that is not necessarily in coordination with or fully in coordination with, but certainly is not out of step with the current administration. So what you have ideally in the transition is those phone calls and those conversations being done at the same time that you have the landing teams of the new administration going into the national security agencies and departments, talking to them about what are the policies, what was the last conversation with this leader, what are the things on the agenda, so that there can be, if not a seamless transition, at least a
Yeah,
rational
but are
transition.
they allowed to talk with them?
Absolutely.
Okay,
In the
so but remember there was
absolutely.
all this talk about the Logan Act and everything. So
Yep.
Flynn's problem was not that he was communicating with the Russians; it's that he lied about it afterwards,
That
right?
was the biggest issue.
Okay, okay.
There also is the issue of whether he was freelancing at some point. That is, whether it was an official act of the transition or whether it was him trying to use his new position
So
to do some personal lobbying. Those are always going to be issues. And the biggest one that ever came up was with Nixon, with the outgoing Johnson
right.
administration, and Nixon basically trying to negotiate with the Vietnamese behind the back of the current administration. That's
And telling
generally
them
regarded as
and
a bad
telling them
idea.
not to sign a peace deal, which
Right on.
again would have been feels wrong to
Yeah.
do that. But so there's nothing that would prevent Joe Biden from saying to Ron Klain, "Hey, would you get somebody on the phone and tell the Iranians please don't blow anything up?"
I
Is there?
And
Is,
ideally, that is done with the State Department, the current State Department, letting them know we are calling the Iranians, we are talking, we're going to deliver this message, and having everyone in agreement about how that works. Once you don't have agreement on how that works, it opens up all of these questions you're asking, which is, wait a minute, are they trying to run a shadow foreign policy? Are they undermining the current
well,
commander
this
in
is what
chief?
I'm getting at actually, because let's there's a lot of make believe here. I
Yeah.
understand that I'm just asking questions. So, given the fact that clearly Biden and Trump are not on the same page when it comes to say the Iranian policy, and the fact that he would be very very reluctant to go through Mike Pompeo's State Department
Mhm.
at this point, he has the facilities to have these communications. So what if they are not on the same page and he does still want to communicate? I guess I'm trying to establish what you are permitted to do. He's a private citizen right now,
Yep.
but clearly what he has to say would be of great interest to our allies, our enemies, who are trying to determine what our plans are, what our tendencies are at this point. So
Yep.
is it possible that there is a shadow foreign policy, and is there anything wrong with that at this point?
Here's what I presume Joe Biden would do as an institutionalist, as somebody who understands the machinery of government over many decades of being in it, is I suspect that in that case where the Trump administration made clear it would not cooperate, it actually doesn't want this, that any communications that Biden had with foreign leaders, let's say Iran, would not be explicit. That is, he would not be trying to get a message to the supreme leader in Iran saying, I want you to do X, Y, and Z before January 20th. And I promise you, after January 20th, I will do A, B, and C. I just don't picture Joe Biden doing that, because then it does raise issues of, wait a minute, are you doing this the right way? And for somebody who campaigned about a return to traditions and norms that have been bedeviled in the last 4 years, I think it would be hypocritical to then go around and do some of those things. However, you can probably get halfway there without crossing any lines. That is, you can probably talk to the Iranians and say, we want to move forward on the issues that we disagree on, but there are some things that are just unacceptable, and they're unacceptable right now, and they're unacceptable in my administration too. That is, try to show continuity, but get the channel of communication open. That would be okay. But there's a lot of gray area here, Charlie, because there isn't a lot of settled law on this issue.
Right.
And there aren't even a lot of good political norms and traditions on this issue, because most often incoming administrations do benefit from a helpful transition. I mean, you had administrations that really, really didn't like each other. For example, Clinton handing off to George W. Bush after the contentious
Mm-hmm.
2000 election, Bush handing off to Obama, and Obama basically ran on not being Bush. And then, of course, Obama to Trump. But in all of those transitions, the outgoing administration cooperated with the incoming administration to try to make this work as well as possible in November, December, and early January. We don't know exactly what's going on with the landing teams this year. We don't know how much assistance is truly being given. I suspect it's more than we're being led to believe, because the vast majority of people in these agencies and departments are career officials who have an interest in seeing things go smoothly in the future. But we just don't know. In the absence of that, we're doing a lot of guesswork right now.
No, and this may be one of the few transitions where the administration is trying to sabotage its successor. The Trump transition was notoriously a disaster, but most of that was self-inflicted. It
Right.
was firing Chris Christie right after the election, throwing away all of his plans, not having anybody assigned to any of these teams. It is interesting watching Biden putting together this administration, and not trying to get my hopes up about this, but it feels so ridiculously normal. Now, I
Right.
know that, there's some Republicans, the Marco Rubios, who are sneering about these, Ivy League types. But what really strikes me is how experienced these people are,
Mhm.
how, most of them strike me as very pragmatic, very knowledgeable. There is going to be a steep learning curve, but these people have been there. That I get the sense of, they're watching the names that when they go into their offices, it won't be for the first time.
That's
They'll
right.
know their way around. They know how this works. And the contrast with 4 years ago is so dramatic, where you basically had this clown car being put together in real time with people who had no idea what they were doing. It really couldn't be more dramatic. And also, the way Biden himself is not really rising to the Trumpian bait. The while Trump
Mhm.
is, throwing stuff around, these, spittle fleck conspiracy theories and everything. Biden's just kind of like tuning it out. I'm not on Twitter. I'm just doing my own thing, step by step by step, playing with the dogs,
That's right.
breaking my foot. But
He's ignoring him.
other than that,
Yeah.
normal,
He's just,
ignoring it.
everybody just ignore the guy flinging poo around over there.
Right.
Just ignore it, and it won't get any attention. Maybe I think we probably will need to save for a future conversation once all of Biden's
Yep.
senior picks have been nominated. We can chat then about how they all stack up. But a few initial thoughts. First of all, you're exactly right. He has picked a team. You remember Doris Kearns Goodwin years ago,
Mm-hmm.
in the era
Rival.
of Obama and Clinton, came out with the book Team of Rivals about Lincoln's cabinet. This is really just a team of competence. It's extreme competence. These are people who know what they're doing. They are widely regarded as very capable. And it's notable that they are not flashy names. You are
Right.
not
Right.
seeing Bernie Sanders nominated as Secretary of State because he's a popular guy and was on cable news a lot. You're not seeing, you didn't even see Pete Buttigieg nominated to be UN ambassador, which was some speculation, because Slayer Pete was so good going on Fox News for the campaign. You're not seeing the best known names in the popular imagination getting these spots. I would bet if you polled 100 Americans, at least 99 of them would not know who Jake Sullivan was. They would say, that name sounds familiar. Did I go
Right.
to high school with him? They probably wouldn't know Tony Blinken, even though he had been Deputy Secretary of State and a key advisor in the Obama administration. But he was not somebody who was in the public spotlight. It is anti-Trump in two ways. It is anti-Trump in the pure competence, as opposed to some of the appointees during the Trump administration. And it's anti-Trump in terms of going for people who know the jobs, do the jobs, not people who look good on television. The contrast is also strong, Charlie, because all of these people who have been nominated to senior national security positions so far are people who have been part of a functioning national security process before. Whether you agreed or not with Obama's foreign policies, the process by which those policies were developed, by having working group meetings within the national security agencies and departments, brokered by the National Security Council, moved up to deputies committee meetings, moved up to principals committee meetings that had paperwork prepared in advance that the principals would read and then decide. That process largely worked. And now you have people coming into those positions who have seen it work at lower levels in the system. They know what this is supposed to be like. Contrast that with the Trump administration. You had people coming in like Rex Tillerson, Mike Pompeo, who had never been part of the executive branch, had never seen any system at any level. Even the so-called adults in the room who were almost all generals. So you had Flynn, Kelly, Mattis, eventually McMaster, all of them very well regarded within the military realm, but they had not served as a deputy national security advisor or as a deputy secretary of state. Even they had not been part of a functioning national security process before. Nobody knew what they were doing, and they were perfectly okay with that. It's going to be shocking just how systematic approaches to national security decisions are based on what we know already of this team.
No, and it's going to be interesting to see how some of these appointments play out internally within the Democratic Party. And of course, I'm not an expert on the internal politics. I thought it was very interesting that Biden would have named Neera Tanden to be the head of the OMB, which is obviously a crucial office because she has been very, very outspoken and not terribly popular with the Bernie bros. I mean, I personally kind of like her, but
Yeah.
I don't think I have a lot of sway in this. In fact, the fact that I just said that probably actually hurts her, but it's going to be interesting to see because if you look at all on Bernie Bro Twitter last night, you could see that they were pretty ticked off about that. That's the only one of the appointments that seems to be generating a significant amount of controversy, as far as I can tell, among the Democrats. But I do think it's dawning on the Democrats that because they don't control the Senate and because their margin in the House is ridiculously slim, they don't have the luxury of a lot of dissension. They
Well,
they have they have to stick together unusually. It's going to be a real test for them.
there's a real issue here, Charlie, that goes to bigger political issues than the personalities. First of all, elections have consequences. We say that in many different contexts, but in this case, Bernie Sanders was not the nominee. Joe Biden was, and Joe Biden won the election. Therefore, the fact that Bernie Sanders or his bros or anyone affiliated with his wing of the party is entitled to any number of cabinet spots is patently ridiculous. For party unity, do you want to represent the spectrum that is the Democratic Party? Probably, and I suspect that he will do that through his advisors and his appointments over the long span of time. But there is no entitlement to getting cabinet positions because you're in the same party. You
Right.
tried to be the nominee, you failed, you don't get to pick cabinet spots. So that's number one. Number two, we do not have a system where cabinet secretaries have an extraordinary amount of independent power. There are some countries that do. There are some countries where actually running the department or agency has immense amounts of independent power apart from the prime minister or the president. In the United States, not so much. The policy comes from the White House, and those cabinet secretaries serve at the pleasure of the president. So all of this fighting over, is there going to be someone at the Labor Department or the Transportation Department or the Agriculture Department who is more in line with AOC's values? At some level, it really doesn't matter because they're going to
Doesn't
be
matter.
executing Joe Biden's policies. So it's window dressing at some level. And honestly, would those people be better off remaining if they were to be pulled out of the House or the Senate? Wouldn't they be better off remaining there where they're actually creating legislation and trying to get things passed rather than working at an agency or department where the president can simply say no to anything you want to do that's edgy?
So what do you think he's going to do with the CIA director? I
This
mean,
is a
I'm
tricky one. Yeah, this is a
I'm
tricky one.
assuming, yeah, it is. That's what I mean. I'm assuming he's going to keep Chris Wray at the FBI because he's got a term, and
Hmm.
because he doesn't want to start off his presidency by doing what Trump did, was firing an FBI director.
Right on.
But CIA tends
In
to be a long tradition
Yeah.
of switching with the parties, and yet Gina Haspel's kind of kept her head down,
Yep.
clearly bucked to the Trump folks. What do you think?
It wasn't always that way. Some CIA directors have kept between administrations. Dulles between Eisenhower and Kennedy, George Tenet between Bill Clinton and George Bush. And almost all directors will tell you that's the way it should be. It is not legislated the way that the FBI director's 10-year term is, but many CIA directors feel it should be kept as far from politics as possible. At the same time, they will tell you you have to be close to the president to be an effective CIA director. If you're Jim Woolsey, who was CIA director for Bill Clinton, and you only see him alone once during the time you're CIA director, you've got a problem. So there's an inherent tension there. Um, Mike Hayden, for example, was perfectly willing to stay on as CIA director for Barack Obama. but Obama wanted a clean change
Mhm.
from the perception of some of the things that had happened, even though they were policy decisions, things about interrogations and things like that during the Bush administration. So he wanted a clean sweep. But most CIA directors will tell you it's best to stay on. There is one problem with that with Gina Haspel, is she went to the State of the Union address, stood up and applauded during political lines.
Okay.
That's a line that CIA
Mhm.
directors traditionally have not crossed,
Hmm.
and it certainly provides a quite reasonable justification for President-elect Biden to name a separate CIA director, even if he would like to go back to the tradition of keeping professionals in those positions across administrations. Chris Wray, there's part of me that thinks that Biden and those around him wouldn't really mind if Trump did fire Chris Wray in a fit
Mhm.
of rage at some point in the next few weeks, because that would leave the position essentially open for him to nominate who he wants. But Chris Wray is a professional. Chris Wray did not go to the State of the Union address, stand up and applaud, and in fact has done a pretty good job as FBI director under extremely challenging conditions in the last couple of years. So, yes, I suspect Wray will stay on. For CIA director, we had the announcement this weekend. One of the things that did pop through my radar screen was that Tom Donilon took himself out of the running. Senior
Mhm.
national security aide in the Obama administration, who I think would have been a quite capable director, but not someone with background in intelligence. And that leaves us with the people who have been bandied about, all being people who have had intelligence experience, ranging from Michael Morrell, who was deputy director and acting director of the CIA, to several senior operations officers, to other former deputy directors like David Cohen. One of the leading candidates that I suspect, if she is not in contention, she should be, is Sue Gordon. Sue Gordon was the principal deputy director of national intelligence, or the PDDNI, for the Trump administration. And famously, when Dan Coates left, was not given the DNI
Mm.
position, even though she was universally respected, um, simply out of presidential pique that she was seen as someone who worked with Coates. Well, that was the job. But Sue Gordon is an immensely capable individual and would be an amazing CIA director, as would many of these others. The one thing that I hope Biden doesn't do is pick some, representative from the Intel Committee. That tends not to go well. We've had some success with outside people coming into the CIA and doing a good job as director, but generally picking somebody who does not know the business, who does not know the people, who does not know the mission, it doesn't go as well. And when you have so many capable people who understand intelligence at a high level, picking a representative who would like to get her feet wet in the intelligence business would probably be a mistake.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I think we've seen what happens when you put people with lacking experience in that. Just listening to you, a couple of things struck me. It was how really truly remarkable it was that Barack Obama kept on George Bush's Secretary of Defense when he came in
Mm-hmm.
after the 2008 election.
Yeah.
That has to be one of the most surprising continuity decisions that I can remember in terms of putting together a team, especially given how contentious the war in Iraq was. But I'm reading his book now, and he basically said he just needed the continuity. He
Yes.
needed the knowledge. He understood that he wasn't going to be able to make changes without having a lot of credibility. So he needed to surround himself with people who knew the nuances and who had the trust of the people in the ranks. But that was I guess I'd never been struck by what an edgy decision that was to keep somebody on from an administration that, in terms of foreign policy, was pretty much the diametric, opposite of what he had run on,
And purported to be. I mean, there's
purported
been
to be.
some there's been some study of how Obama foreign policy in many ways ended up echoing the
Yeah.
second term of the Bush administration, and Bob Gates may have had some role in that. Bob Gates was certainly somebody affiliated with Republican presidents over the course of his career, but he had started working back in the days of Lyndon Johnson, and he was a career intelligence and policy official. So it was perhaps an edgy choice because no doubt he had plenty of people. This is Obama. No doubt he had plenty of people knocking on his door, wanting to be Secretary of Defense who had better Democratic Party credentials. But here is a wonk. Here is somebody who actually understood it at a time that the United States was in overseas conflict.
Yeah, two different wars.
That was going to be central to the Obama administration from day one. So yes, I think that was an edgy choice, as you said, but a good one. We don't really have any parallels for that right now. We do have a new tradition, and this is one that does not have a long American history, but the last few administrations, we have had presidents who have kept on a cabinet member or have named a cabinet member from the other party. And this is a case, even Trump, he kept on I think he actually elevated to the Department of Veterans Affairs front office,
Right.
Someone who had been in the Obama leadership there as well. But Obama kept on Gates. And Bush kept on, was it Norman Mineta? I can't remember. But you've had this tradition now going back for decades where you've got at least an attempt to show I'm reaching out to the other party. It would surprise me if Biden doesn't have someone who has some credentials on that side. I don't suspect of Mitt Romney being pulled out of the Senate for a senior position. I don't see something like that happening. But don't be surprised if in one of these national security positions or one of the other agencies or departments, you do see someone who is quite easily identified as a Republican who works with the Biden administration officially.
David Priess, thank you so much for coming on this Monday after a long Thanksgiving weekend to sum everything up. Appreciate it very much.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We will be back tomorrow, and we will do this all over again.